off of a short story they called The Sorceress Next Door, if you've heard of it. But it's going to be basically an extension of that character along with all the other kids in that character's neighborhood. And besides the fact that the kids in his neighborhood have no problem with him portraying, like expressing himself as a female character, there's actually a scene that makes me like tear up when I read it, with that Chad had come up with where his mom talks to him and basically, spoiler alert, but says like, I'm, you know, however you feel about this, I'm okay with it. And so I think it's going to be really, I'm super excited about this book, and I can say that because that's one of the parts that I did not actually write myself, that was my artist. But I'm excited because it's not just going to be really good for kids, but it'll be a good way for parents to be able to break that down too and give them an example of how to talk to their kids about gender identity.
That is one thing that's missing from almost all of these books is, with the exception of Lumberjanes, there are no adults. There aren't adults that are having these conversations. These are like young people, children or teens or early 20-somethings having those conversations between themselves. But with the exception of Lumberjanes, there are no adults saying, I'm with you, I get you, this is who you are and I accept that. And that's definitely something that's lacking in this literature. There's a lot better work when you talk about prose or resources that you can find on the internet. But
I don't know, YA books have that problem too. So I think it's the age group that they parents, we don't want those.
It's worth pointing out that like if you have young people in your life that are trying to have these conversations, they're not getting any examples of adults like being okay. So, but yeah, we've got
so I skipped to the next slide. Yeah.
Well, can I say they're not getting examples of the things that the adults in their lives should be.
Yeah.
The support the adults in their lives should be giving to them.
Yes. And it's funny because it's mostly adults writing these books, so you would think they would write themselves in as like, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
So these are just the next slide. These are slightly more adult. So like, for example, I actually have Angela Asgard's Assassin and Queen of Hell in the YA collection, but maybe not every library would. So I don't know if anybody wants to talk about any of these titles.
So I put The Pride up there because it's one of my personal favorites. It's basically the Avengers, but everybody's queer, and it is actually fairly racially diverse. It's also very LGBTQ diverse. It's not that everybody is one type of LGBTQ. There's agender folks, there's gay guys, there's lesbians, and you can see the bear, like, literally a bear. Yeah, exactly. And it's really fun and funny and packed with action without, so it's kind of what Katie was talking about, like their superheroes and their adventures are not necessarily tied to the fact that they are LGBTQ. It's just that they built themselves a logical as opposed to biological family based on their shared identities. So it's by an independent publisher too, so I want everybody to go check his stuff out. Joe Glass is awesome.
Yeah, and he's also a gay man.
Yeah.
So again, even when like, because I think there are a few times when people in that universe either don't get it, but the joke is, man, that like this is really annoying for people. It's not making the joke the marginalized characters.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's from someone that has those experiences writing it, I think is a big part of that.
And then let's just move on. We've got some web comics as well, because I think that's what we were talking about, is that's maybe the place where it's easier to find.
I had to cut this list down like significantly. Yeah. I could have filled this with like 50, honestly.
Which is why like webcomics are the future, and like we should all be supporting webcomics as much as possible. They have so many Kickstarters.
Yeah.
Human Star makes me cry.
It is so
Every
good,
update.
you guys.
Every
And
update.
that's actually a really good one where it's about, it has is it an android?
Yes.
Who is also a trans girl.
Yes.
And it's treated really, really carefully. I believe the writer is.
I think the writer is non-binary.
It's non-binary.
But that is one of the few examples where there are adults having the conversation with the young trans character. Like her father has conversations with her, and like her transition is portrayed very sensitively and very lovingly, and like her father has, like, they have to have explicit conversations about like, all right, you are an android, how are we going to handle your transition, and it's a different kind of transition than if you weren't.
Also, I don't remember if it was put, but the Steven Universe comics, the ones that are coming out from, I think, Boom, are actually written by a non-binary person right now. And the Stefani issue, I think it was issue 2, is beautiful. I wrote about it for Comics Alliance, and it's like, it was like my favorite thing, and you could totally tell that it was written by someone who understands that point of view. It was so well done. So if you have to buy any single issue of anything, from this, get the Steven Universe #2 that I think came out last week. Sorry, that's not webcomics.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So I want to go forward now and to talk about some books that maybe don't get it right. And I also, while I'll leave this slide up, I just want to, for the panel, maybe talk about how/why certain books are falling short.
So I picked these 2 explicitly, and I'm going to say up front, the writer on No World is actually a comic writer that I enjoy. He writes big blockbuster comics. He writes punch him in the face comics. I like those kind of comics. But No World is about a trans woman who is a former NFL linebacker. She is 6'5" and has retained a lot of the traits from her former life. And I'm not saying explicitly that that's a bad thing, because trans people come in all shapes and sizes, and transitions look different and are very individual. But there are no trans people or no non-binary people on either of the creative teams for these books. And a lot of people have had conversations about the challenges of having white, cis, het dudes come in and write these stories about queer people or women of color or all of these.
What?
Yeah.
There's a cricket in the
Yeah. So just like my biggest thing is I Google everybody on a comic when I write about them, and it's
Including the letters.
Oh yeah, including the letters, and it takes me forever, and it feels really creepy and stalkerish sometimes. But like, if you look at an entire creative team from writer to artist to colorist to letterer to editors, and it's all white dudes, there is likely going to be a challenge with representation just because they have no lived experience, and so they are likely relying on stereotypes as opposed to actual knowledge.
I will say too, I think we put Batgirl in as a recommendation, and because a few years ago, the Batgirl and Burnside team got a lot of criticism for a particular issue that had a villain that was coded as either genderqueer or trans, and wasn't done very well. And they basically took like a few days after all the criticism, and they wrote a really, really strong apology, said, we messed up, we're gonna fix it. They fixed it in the digital version and in the trade. And there's still trans and genderqueer readers who did not think that the apology was enough, or they didn't think that it was changed enough. But the fact that they listened, and that they fixed it, and that they didn't try to make it about them being attacked because they were criticized, brought back a lot of people, and it ended up still making the book stronger. So, which is, I think, the reason why we kept it on that list. Because, like, if you mess up, which, again, like, if I'm writing I'm a queer woman, but I'm writing about queer experiences in my books that are different from mine. If I mess up, I'm 100% prepared to do my best to not take it personally and try to do better and apologize. So it's something that I'm ready for. So people who are writing about experiences that are different from them, you just gotta be prepared to not get it right, but to try to research and learn ahead of time. Which again, like you said, for a lot of these creative teams, it's not that they can't write it well, it's that when we see that there are a bunch of straight white dudes, we're prepared for there to be flubs.
High hopes, low expectations.
Yes.
Never surprised, never disappointed.
It comes from having a lack of confidence in people's ability to be able to like put the effort into researching and talking to people, and having like diversity readers look at your stuff, and having other people come in and talk to you about what you're making. And also, to Katie's point, the reaction to like the fallout of a lot of these situations is always like unequal, aggressive pushback on the concerns of people. And what the Bad Girl team did well was they let everybody know that they 100% understood what the problem was. They understood what they did wrong. They listened to everybody who said anything about that issue, top to bottom. And they made attempts to fix it in the trade, and going forward add more gender diversity in their book. And the response to these situations are very telling.
So just as a note, the Batgirl book is kind of divided into 3 chunks. There's like the Gail Simone New 52, then there's the Batgirl Burnside, and now there's a current Batgirl. And throughout that, Batgirl's roommate and one of her best friends was a trans woman, and there was also a B-plot about Alicia and her wife having a conversation about wanting to have children. And there was a very touching moment where Barbara and Alicia were talking about the difficulties and the gender dysphoria and the body dysphoria of being a trans woman and wanting to have a child with your cis female wife. And that was very telling to me, that I think the whole team learned a lot, and subsequent teams learned a lot. And that to me says, not only did the creators themselves learn something, the editorial staff learned something, and they could push it to a really good, again, tender. It's treating it very gently and very honestly.
They set a precedent for whoever comes next.
Yeah.
They're also, the Burnside run, so like the middle run, also had a part where Alicia saves her fiance from man-eating tigers, and it is the funnest.
Yeah.
That also had Batgirl like kicking and punching a tiger. It was just like the best. It was the best little arc. But the fact that they got to have this like character who's not really, that's not a superhero, but is in a superhero world, get to like save the love of her life right before their wedding was a pretty fun issue.
So before I open it up to questions, I want to pose one last question for you guys. And so, I mean, this was sort of an education panel, I guess, originally, sort of. So I want to say, how can comics be utilized by teachers and other professionals to create these productive dialogues regarding gender identity?
I think Jeff said it at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, and I think even we could take this further apart from educator and professionals, just for anyone. Yeah, just having that representation, for me, something that with all of the good representations that we were talking about today, a lot of it's not a focus on that aspect of the character. It's about a good story that those characters are in that world. And that again has that normalizing effect to say for the readers, for when we're talking about young children, when we're talking about adults trying to grapple with these things that seem very new and sometimes scary. And I think like going back to like what we were talking about, the Batman type of Batgirl, I'm sorry, the situation, it's about recognizing what you don't know, coming to terms with that, and researching, talking, figuring that out, and then if you make a mistake, being very open and honest with that. A lot of things are very new, and so starting there, I think, starting at that point of that kind of just unknown, but I want to know more, can help you just navigate your interactions with other people and have those conversations.
I wanted to go to the book Backstagers. In the first issue, the opening, our like point of view character has this moment where he's on the phone with his mom, and he has to go to an all-boys school, and he's saying to her like, I don't want to go to the school. There's all these stupid boys. All they do is like stink and like fart all the time.
And they had stink lines. They drew stink lines over all the boys in the background.
And so it's funny, but it's also super relatable to a lot of kids, because what he's really saying is, I have to go to this school with all these boys and I can't perform masculinity like they can, and I'm broken. He doesn't have the words to express that, and a lot of young people don't have the words to express those things either. So with a lot of these, a lot of the books that we talked about and things that people haven't written yet are great ways to give kids the words they need to say how they feel without all the
They don't have to get a master's degree in order to
Also,
take this conversation.
also, if you are looking for trans male characters, that has a great one where it was, again, it's an all-boys school, and that character had gone to an all-girls school, and we got to see some of his friends from that old school. So it's very good, like, I don't know if they ever say the word trans, but it's very clear, like, even beyond the fact that you see him using a binder, you, like, logically, if you know that he went to an all-girls school at one point, you can fill in the blanks, even if they don't say, I'm a trans male character. But they make it still very overtly clear that that's what happened.
The writer of that comic is actually here this weekend, James Tinian IV. He's amazing and lovely and perfect, so please go throw money at him and buy Backstagers and I can sign it.
I was gonna say, I was so mad because the trade's out
Yeah.
like in a month. I was like, I wanna buy the trade because I buy it digitally, I want you to sign it. But he also happens to write like Batman and like a billion other things.
Yeah.
So if you like Batman, and he's also he's a bi cis man. And the artist for Backstagers is a trans man. So,
Brian Tsai,
yeah.
great.
So again, you notice the trend that the most successful representation happens to come from people with lived experiences and people that are also part of the queer community that are just happen to be super, super thoughtful. And
Authentic representation.
Yeah, authentic
Yeah.
representation.
There's another book James Tinian writes called The Woods. And one of the characters is a trans man, and he is like a prince and a knight. And it's some of the greatest like young adult queer characters I've ever read. It's really good.
It's all of the parts of Buffy that I love, and none of the parts of Buffy that made me really sad. It's like,
Angry.
yeah, and angry, but like I admit this freely. Again, I got into comics because of Charlotte Hugh Jackman, and I watched CW shows. Like I love high school drama, and this is high school drama without punching down. It's high school drama without being a jerk to people that are already marginalized. And there's aliens and adventures, and it's super fun, and it just. Basically, if his name is on a book, you know I already own it.
Okay, so let's open it up to questions.
We actually got a question from the audience already on Twitter, so I just wanted to answer it real fast. Can you go back to the webcomics page? Sorry.
Also, anybody who answers a question, I have codes for Moonlighters #1. So incentive, please ask us questions.
Very good.
The asterisks that I put on this page are on dumbing of age and questionable content. They are both written and drawn by cis-het dudes and have trans secondary characters. So I wanted to be explicit that like we have warned people to make sure of the diversity of the creators, but both of these guys do a lot of research and talk to a lot of trans people and treat this subject, again, very, very respectfully.
And they also have a lot of other cis queer characters in there, especially for like Dumbing of Age. It's also a huge cast. So yeah, it's a secondary character, but like in a cast of like lots of secondary characters.
I just accidentally put an asterisk on Agents of the Realm. That's just a mistake on my part. So ignore that one.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify, so Tamara Roth, of course, alters is trans. I don't think it's had a significant effect on the problematic nature of that book, but I just didn't want to.
No, so Matt very kindly just pointed out that the colorist on Alters is trans, which is again a mistake on my part. So.
No, it's,
The letter.
Letterer? Sorry.
no,
Colorist.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
But, you know, I think one of the interesting things about alters, I guess this is really some questions. One of the interesting things about alters is, you know, there was a lot of negative press going into it. I tend to hold back, you know, until it comes out. But what was most important was then listening to what trans critics had to say. And there were a lot of people who came out and spoke about it. And I think it was really illuminating. So it's not just the creators too, it's also, you know, what critics like some of yourselves have to say.
I was gonna say, I will cop to it when the Batgirl controversy happened. The first day, I was like, I don't see a problem with this. But it took and luckily I kept my mouth shut on Twitter. Because like, which by the way, sometimes that can be the best thing for you, is to just shut up and listen. Because then, like, within the first day, I was like, oh right, these criticisms make total sense. And then I was saying, like, you know what, I love the book, but yeah, there are some problems with it. So as like shutting up and listening is a good idea.
Yep.
Regarding question with content, if anyone wants to read it, it starts out not good.
Oh yeah, he's been doing it for like 15 years,
Yeah,
so do not
like,
feel the need to go all the way
maybe like put
back.
it in like the middle.
Yeah.
You could probably start like 3 years ago very, very comfortably and not have to read all of those back.
It is fun to see his growth though. As
Yeah.
an artist and a creator.
It starts very much as like the like one of the thousand slice of life.
It starts off like Friends and turns into Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
With robots. There are
Yeah, with robots. There's really funny, good robots in it.
Yeah. And let me know. You know what? If anybody who asks questions, just come see me after I have the codes. I won't make you come up to the table.
Do you have a question back there?
Yeah, I do. So my best friend, her child, thinks they might be trans, which I am, as a queer woman, I'm like, yes, gender identity is so important. I want to support you. They also have mental health problems, and they're 15. I'm like, oh God, you have my anxiety too. You'll be fine. So I'm wondering if you have a recommendation for a graphic novel or a webcomic series I can point them to that deals not only with being potentially trans and dealing with your gender identity, but also dealing with the mental health sphere and how...
James Tinian the Fourth. Like, seriously. He also speaks very eloquently and openly about his own depression and anxiety on Twitter. And I would trust that man with my life, honestly. Like, he handles that stuff very well.
But also to a good point that, like, when we're talking about just gender identity, we've incorporated other marginal societies in our conversation here. I mean, it's important to think of people complexly. Again, we can't like box people in, and again, in storytelling, that same thing goes.
Yeah, I think it frustrates me so much when people who want to be sarcastic about diversity and representation go like, well, then why don't you just throw in a superhero who has a disability and who is black and trans and a lesbian? I'm like, well,
Yes.
one, those people exist, and two, I want to read that book. But like, those people exist, and so many people. I mean, yeah, I want more books like that are able to juggle those different topics in one character, because those people exist in the world and they don't get to see themselves very often.
And those stories are really interesting.
Yeah, there's a couple of the webcomics we listed, Trans Girl Next Door, and there's a couple that are like that are personal journal comics that I think would be very helpful in that specific situation, because it is like independent creators telling their own stories.
Well, my question earlier was about alters, but I feel like that was covered. But I just want to add to that. I think Runaways is a fantastic example of diversity representing gender, anti-binary, sexual preference, and also people of color. And it's just like a great genre representation for people dealing with mental illness and all sorts of other complicated diverse issues.
The suggestion for people that might not have been able to hear is The Runaways. It's a great book. I think that sometimes it can be a little bit of a mixed bag, because like a lot of Big Two books, when the writers change or the artists change, it can very much change the tone of the book. But there are a lot of really great issues, and honestly, you can just like Google Runaways best issues, and pretty great lists will come up and tell you which ones you should be reading.
Right there?
So, as a cis queer girl, I want to help educate my friends and especially my family about trans issues and non-binary people. What would be your main recommendation as a cis person to tell my family what should I be saying as a cis person?
Oh man, because I understand where you're coming from, and I wish I had a better answer off the top of my